All right. I guess I shouldn't. I shouldn't and keep delaying. Technically, a lot of progress has been made recent as of late. I just haven't been. I haven't been recording it. Not because I don't think it was substantial progress. It's just I get kind of, I don't know, kind of nervous when it comes to recording my progress. Anyway, this is continuation of the Udemy Space Shooter modified. You notice I have made a few more prefabs. You notice here that I actually have two enemies now. This enemy is called a seeker. And the difference between this and the normal enemy is that this one gave me a lot more problems. Okay, that's not exactly fair. Oh,
Hello.
oh, sorry, I'm just um recording. Just give me a
Oh,
moment.
okay. Sorry.
No. I'll just don't. You don't have to worry about leaving. I'll just drop your volume. I'll 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 turn your volume back up when I'm done recording. Um, actually, you know what? I'm gonna leave the chat. Sorry. Um. Yeah. So as I was saying, this enemy gave me a lot more problems because, well, this enemy was playing with something brand new that I haven't really played with before. So the entire premise behind the normal enemy is that he's more or less blind. He will go to a certain direction, and then he will spawn on the right, and then try to go try to go left. He will also have a random value associated with what vary how whether he goes how far diagonally he goes in what direction. So let's just put him in here. And oh, that's weird. Ah, here it is. Sorry. Looks like I kind of I've lost track of where everything is. So let me just move this guy this way, and I'm gonna quickly grab this fella and move him in as well. Alright, so the basic premise behind the Seeker is that he was supposed to do three things. Well, four things, but it's actually condensed into three actions. He spawns in, will spawn in on the right hand side. He'll then track the player for a few seconds. We'll take a look at his script, and I'll show you how it all works. This is my first time playing with a Switch, and I'll try to not overcomplicate the video by just telling. The simple fact is that when you start an action and you want it to stop, you need to actually find what that action is doing and stop it yourself. For the longest time, this enemy just always wanted to charge at the player because the charge function is called RB velocity transform dot forward. This will cause the enemy to travel in whatever z axis it's facing. So let me just show you how it works. So as you notice, this enemy is now facing me. He will now wind. Stage 2 of his action, technically stage 1 and stage 2 are occurring within the same time period. To explain, stage 1 is spawn in. It's the first thing the enemy does. Stage 2 is to track the player. It does this exactly as it spawns in. It will track the player for a few frames, maybe probably a second or something, and then it will prepare a charge. Prepare the charge is what you see here with the wind back. This is to telegraph that it's getting ready to attack, and then it's going to charge. Because because it's looking at the player, it already decides it will already identify its z-axis. On top of that, the enemy will also stop tracking the player after he prepares his charge. This is because of where is it? It's because of attack location. Eventually, transform dot position becomes attack position. The player dot position, and this is where it all comes from. When I say that the enemy needs to be aware of where the player is, it's actually what's going on is that when the enemy spawns in, it's going to grab the public transform player, and at the very beginning of its script, it will say if the player is a null, in other words, if the player is not assigned, it will then it will search the entirety of the Unity production. Well, whatever every objects in the game at the moment, and will look for a game object with the tag player, which obviously my player has. It doesn't matter if your game object is called player. If it's not, it doesn't matter if your game object is called player. If it's not tagged as a player, it will not read it, because that's how Unity operates. So the way it works is that it has stages. It's the same way I script my missiles and my enemies. So, and this is governed by a switch, and the switch is governed by a switch number. Essentially, case one, which will be governed by the integer enemy stage. So essentially, once each timer has expired, it will. So when it spawns in, it's going to set its time. It's going to start setting timers. Then when their actions occur, when the stages occur, so track player occurs, it will then start running the timer. When the timer falls below 1, it will then the timer will then lock into 0. Track player. Needless to say, this took a lot longer than it really should to get working, but I managed to get it to work finally. The biggest problem was, of course, charge. This enemy just wanted to keep charging, because oftentimes it would charge at the player before even entering stage 3. Essentially, it would track player, and then it would just zoom off without warning. On top of that, once it started zooming off, it just wouldn't stop. It would just keep trying to fly off in whatever direction that it was set to at the time. And this is what I mean when I say that when you set an action, you need to have a way to turn it off, and not just turn off the function that called the action. So, for example, think about this as a button. The private void charge is a movement button. So you press a button and transform.forward activates. It doesn't matter if you say how much you try to check off the charge, or how much you want to try to deactivate this function, because all this thing does is that it sets things into motion. It doesn't stop the motion as I kind of associate, it's like a button. If you press a button to turn the lights on, it's only a turn on button. It's not a turn off button. It's not a light. It's not like a light switch or at least, it's like it's a switch on, but it's not a switch off. If the function is not active, it doesn't automatically disable everything within the function. You see? So even when this function isn't active, this code is still running. So essentially, I needed to find something that would just stop the object in its tracks, and that is where rb.velocity, that will be called when spawn in, and when it reverts to spawn in. So when when the reset timer is less than 0, it will activate stage 1. Stage 1 will automatically run Stage 1 will automatically run the rb.velocity vector3.0. This will stop the thing from running, and that is how you have it work. That's how it works. So as you can see, so going back, let's show you. It's going to go, it's going to run back, and it's going to fly. The next thing is, of course, you notice there's more enemies now. That's because this game actually has a spawn. It actually has a spawn manager now. That will now start randomly spawning enemies as the game progresses. As for how I make these enemies die, how I kill these enemies off, this is probably not the best way to do it. I'll be perfectly honest. Because the thing is, you have the enemy's behavior script, but if you recall how my lasers and how my bullets and my missiles are laid out, they were initially calling the health values within the enemy script itself. So what I did was I utilized this enemy health script, which was for the longest time just sitting there doing nothing. And so now each enemy essentially has two scripts: a behavior script that will decide how the enemy behaves, and a health script that whose only function is to to dictate how much health the enemy has and when it will die. So the Seeker is set to have a health of 60. The normal enemy is set to have a health of 50. I actually am surprised that it worked out as well as it did. I was at first worried that essentially it would cause the enemies to have the same health because it's calling on the same script. But I suppose like each instance of the script occurring is kind of like its own instance, I think. In terms of what else I've managed to do is that I've created this here spawn manager which has an enemy container parented onto it. So to quickly go in, I'll quickly go into the spawn manager. Now, based on the Udemy tutorial, well, I already went pretty far from the basis of the Udemy tutorial to begin with, because now I have two enemies. Yay me. So this was where they taught me about enumerators. Now, because I went kind of far ahead with my player script, I already am kind of familiar with enumerators, but that doesn't mean that I can't learn it again, because obviously I still didn't understand it, and I'm not sure if I fully understand it now. Regardless, the enumerator here is what dictates a lot of the spawning. So the original code was that every 5 seconds it's going to run this yield return new wait for seconds. So every time this function operates, it's going to then stop and wait for 5 seconds, and then run the code again. Because this is a while loop, it's not a single use action. It's something that will continually be called until something stops it, essentially. Kind of like how that thing wouldn't stop moving, but it only needed to be called once. So all it did was it sets its velocity, but it doesn't unset it. It's kind of hard to explain. From this, I managed to also develop a kind of random number generator system. So the idea is that because we have two enemies, the two enemies are not equal, because the Seeker is obviously a bigger threat to the player than the normal enemy. The normal enemy is more or less blind, it has less health, and yeah, it essentially is going to keep running in a direction and just hope it hits something. The Seeker will actively try to kill you, or, well, actively try to home in on your location. Because it has a much higher priority, obviously I don't want I don't want them to, since they are different, the Seeker is a bigger threat, I don't want it and the normal enemy to share the same priority. The hope is that there are going to be more regular enemies than there are Seekers. Think of the Seeker as an elite. You don't want a game where you fight nothing but elites. So the idea is this. The enemy spawned... Essentially... Actually, this code is kind of worthless now. So, when this code when this code runs, it will run the enemy spawn decision, which is a random range that runs 1 to 10, that will select a random integer between 1 to 10. The reason for this is because, well, the number itself, enemy spawn decision, is itself an integer. I could make this a float, and then it would then allow for decimal points, but I don't think that's going to change much in the long run. So the basic idea is that if the enemy spawn so if the number called is anywhere between 1 to 7, is a number less than 7, it's going to spawn a normal enemy. If it's more than 7, it's going to then instantiate a Seeker. It's then going to wait for 5 seconds and try again. So, actually, I'm kind of curious. If spawn active equals true, would that work? I have to check it out. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Okay, so... Huh. I see. So this set spawn active is equal to true. Even if I did run the coroutine, it wouldn't run because its decision was that it will only run if spawn active is equal to true. So it needed to turn on it needed to both activate the coroutine itself. It also needed to set the value that would allow for the coroutine to run. If that makes any sense. Furthermore, you notice that we also set this as a game object to be parented. As I said, the spawn manager has what's called an enemy container. So the idea is that any enemy that spawns will be spawned as a child to the enemy container. That is a child to the spawn manager. This is how it works. You have you have a private game object, which is the enemy container itself. So you just grab the container, put it in here, and now every time the new enemy is spawned, it will then transform the parent. It will then make this line of code will then make the new object become a parent of the enemy in the game in the object in the enemy container field. More or less, that's about it for what I've done for game design. But when it comes to what I've done so far, I've actually done quite a bit. I used to be, if you looked at all my earlier videos on my YouTube channel, you notice that I actually used to model. I used to do 3D modeling. I was trained on Autodesk Maya from my time learning in a previous animation school. I was at first very hesitant to get into Blender because it was a thoroughly new program. The UI was completely alien to me, and because of that, I was really scared. I know, I'm a fucking chicken. But after a while, I guess I decided to bite the bullet and just do it anyway. And that typically is kind of the how should I say it? The advice I would give people is don't be afraid. Don't just like sit there and be kind of a victim of your own uncertainty, I suppose. Always try to better yourself. I should say, or at very least, don't. If you want to try something, don't be afraid to actually do it, you know? And for some reason, this, oh yeah, I subdivided this as a test, but I think it doesn't need that anymore, and I broke it. Nah, don't worry, it's fine. Blender is actually, I gotta admit, Blender is actually surprisingly useful, or I don't know, versatile. Oh dear. Oh yeah, there are vertexes here too. So let me just quickly do this and this. Then I can grab the edges, and you can fill in. This is what I mean. It's very easy to make new vertices, and as it's very easy to make new vertices and new edges and new faces. Because of this, it actually does make a lot of Blender's modeling a lot easier than Maya. Maya was, honestly, if I have to be brutally honest, Maya was kind of difficult with that. But this, I consider this a considerable this 3D model of this double barrel shotgun. It's not done yet because, well, honestly, yeah, it's not done yet. A lot of the mechanisms have not been modeled. It's not even animated. Now, if you're wondering that if you're noticing that there's something kind of odd about this double barrel shotgun's design, I'll explain to it, because this actually follows a design that's not initially a double barrel shotgun. This is what's called a. This is actually based on the double derringer. It's just scaled up into a shotgun function. As you can see, I still have quite a lot to do. I need to modify the upper barrel here to include a sight. I need to model the hinge mechanism, because unlike double barrel shotguns, the brake action of a double derringer flips upward rather than downward. But yeah, these recent times have definitely been harrowing for me in terms of just how much I've been trying to apply myself, trying to get better at a skill. But I wouldn't say that it was a, I don't know, waste of time, or it was undue stress, because it was, I mean, if you want something to get done, you got to put in the effort to do it. That's me. I want to put the effort to do it, because this is all very interesting to me, and because I want to be a game designer. Nobody's gonna make my game for me, so I'm gonna just jump in and just do it. What's the worst that can happen? You know? Regardless, that has been my progress report. I will be moving forward to new game designs once I'm done with this. Once I'm done with the Udemy tutorial, once I'm done with that, I'm gonna be starting a new game design. I'll inform you when I get around to it. I don't want to, I don't want to just talk about the game design without actually working on it. So, with that said, have a nice day, all of you. I'm not joking here. All of you have a nice day, have a nice night. If it's your birthday, happy birthday. Day. If it's your anniversary, happy anniversary. I'll see you around.